And we're very excited to welcome to Let's Get To Dan Simon of Studio Simon. Dan, first of all, I'm excited to have you on for two reasons. One, you're recommended by Paul Caputo, who's a mutual friend. And anytime good people recommend good people, I think good things happen. And I am just an obsessed fan of minor league baseball, and so many of your designs are some of my favorites. So excuse me while I gush, and thank you for being on the show.
Well, gush away. Thank you very much for that, all of those very kind words. And I'm excited to be on your podcast with you. Well, your podcast and YouTube, right?
Yeah,
So,
we're a web series and we're going to be on Amazon soon, but all that's still getting kind of put together. But yeah, we are a little bit all over the place in a good way, although I'm sometimes all over the place in a bad way too. Um, let's dive into it then. How do you become a kid who, I'm assuming you liked art growing up and you thought to yourself, I want to get into graphic design, I want to get into branding, and how do you make that jump?
now when you say graphic design and branding, are you yet asking about sports branding, or are you just asking
Just in
about?
general, just how did you decide like you wanted to go down that path in the first place?
Um, it was because of Thurman Munson.
Okay.
I know that then leads to some silence because it's like, how could that possibly,
Right. How could that
how
possibly
can he
be?
be responsible for this? But unfortunately, well, here's the story, and I'll try to give the elevator pitch version of it because it's a little longer than this. I was how old would I have been? 17 years old, and this would have been August of 1979. So I've just, if anyone wants to do the math, you know how old I am. And I was, for your viewers who may not know who Thurman Munson was one of the best catchers in the game from 1970 until 1979. He unfortunately died in a plane crash of a small prop plane he was piloting.
Oh,
And that happened in the summer of the 79 season. And I was sitting I was in our family room at my house in Wayne, New Jersey. And Thurman had just died, and I had cut out pictures and headlines and things like that from the newspaper, the New York Times, the New York Post, the Daily News. My dad would bring home we lived in New Jersey. He worked in New York. He'd bring home those papers. We got the New York Times delivered. And I had a piece of poster board in front of me, and I was arranging all of these things. I was making a poster memorializing our beloved Yankee catcher and captain who had just died in this plane crash. And while I was doing this, I was talking with my mom, and I was a senior in actually I had just graduated from high school, and I knew I was going to college, but I had no idea of what I wanted to be. And I was talking to my mom about the fact that I don't know what I want to do. And she asked me a question that, frankly, no one had ever asked me before. Or
okay.
nobody who could potentially guide me somewhere had ever asked me. She said, "What do you like to do?" And I thought about that for a second. I looked down at what I was doing, and I said, "I like doing this." And she said, "Well, that's graphic design." Now, I'd heard of graphic design, but I never really thought about it, really didn't know exactly what it was. But I guess, well, my mom was a little more cultured than I was. She liked to go to museums. She liked to go to the opera and the ballet. She liked to go to museums. She understood what art was. She also was an editor for a magazine. So I guess she understood
Hmm.
moving things around on a page. And that's one of the disciplines of graphic design. So that's when I first was made aware of this as something that was a potential job for me. I did not immediately go to school for graphic design. I had already been I had already decided I was going to Rutgers, which is the state school of New Jersey, the only state school that's not named after the state. Little trivia there for you.
That actually is interesting. I did not know that. All
Yeah,
right.
and I once got that question in playing Trivial Pursuit, and I
Wow.
knew it.
Yeah.
I knew it right away. But anyway, I went to school. I went there, and after a year and a half of going there, I didn't feel like I was. It was leading me towards some end. And speaking of my mom again, so this is after a year and a half. I'm home for Christmas break, and I'm sitting in the kitchen, and I just said to her, I hadn't really thought this out, but I said, I'm not going back. And she said, that's okay. You don't need to go back, but you have to do something. I
Mm.
had not thought, I had not thought that far. So,
Dan, I had a similar situation. I ended up in the army. I'm glad you ended up doing this. So there you go.
yeah, two different outcomes to this little um, conundrum of what to now do. And I had to think fast. So I said, you know what? I'll go to art school. And I applied to the School of Visual Arts in New York City. I went there, and that was the beginning of my design career. So kind of, I said it was the elevator pitch, a little bit of a longer answer, but it was not well thought out. It just all happened. And thank goodness my mother was there to prompt me.
My other business, Dan, is independent film. It's actually where I make the majority of my money. And so I appreciate a good elevator pitch, whether it's really an elevator or not. One of the reasons why I think one of the reasons you're on the show, and I think you're a really big part of, I think, changing my life indirectly because I'm born and raised in Houston, Texas, an Astros fan. I kind of knew minor league baseball was a thing. And then I discovered it in part because I feel like we're in the middle of a revolution when it comes to team branding and team identities. So just how did you end up getting involved in that part of the business? I mean, I know you also did Super Bowl stuff, which, you've just done everything. How did you settle, or not settle, but how did you get involved working in minor league baseball?
Well, it was, even though what you just said about us being in the middle of a revolution with regard to minor league baseball branding, this thing started about, let's see, my mom was still alive, so 20 or so years ago. The revolution hadn't quite started, but the seeds were planted for it. I got this catalog delivered to me called Starstruck. I don't think it's something that's around anymore because I don't think catalogs are as big of a thing as they were in those pre-internet days, because now
Mhm.
the internet is the catalog,
Right.
everything. So and in this catalog, they had minor league baseball caps. And I remember two in particular, the Billings Mustangs and the Madison Muskies.
Mhm.
Uh, and they had quirky logos on them, nothing like the logos you see in Major League Baseball. And I remember thinking, hey, this is fun. I want to be part of this fun. And uh, through a whole nother story, which I'd be happy to tell you about, but it's again, well, let's tell this story.
Go for it. This is
My
your time.
my parents were at a wedding and a wedding reception, and my dad was sitting next to a gentleman who you're sitting next to somebody you don't know, you strike up a conversation. Turned out this gentleman owned a minor league baseball team.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad's, and somehow the conversation got started, not got started, conversation got to the point where this gentleman, whose name was and still is Marvin Goldklang, said, we just signed an affiliation. They were an independent minor league baseball team, not in an independent league. Back then, some teams, minor league teams in the affiliated minor leagues,
Uh-huh.
were independent teams and had to stock their own players. They didn't get them
The
from.
Mavericks in Portland famously were. part of the, yeah.
That's the most famous example of such a team. So you understand that clearly, and so just for your viewers and listeners who don't really understand that, today we have independent minor league baseball where you don't have a major league parent club, so you've got to find your own players. Mm-hmm. Then you have affiliated minor league baseball clubs where your roster is stocked by the major league team who drafts these high school and college players. And but back then there were several minor league teams playing in affiliated leagues who were independent teams. The Marvin Goldklang's team at the time, had they moved yet? Yes, they had. They used to be they were originally the Miami Miracle, then they became the Fort Myers Miracle. And they had just signed an affiliation agreement with the Minnesota Twins. And he mentioned this to my dad about how they wanted a new identity that was that felt like they were a minor league club. They wanted to look and feel like the Minnesota Twins, or at least have enough similarities that people could see that they were Minnesota Twins affiliate. And my dad said, well, my son's looking to get into sports design. Is it okay if he gives you a call? Marvin said, sure. And that was my first minor league, my first sports branding project, period. And that was 30 years ago.
Wow.
30 years ago. Yep. And here I am still doing it and still doing minor league baseball. Now, as you mentioned, I've done Super Bowl logos. I've done work. I've done hockey teams. I've done collegiate athletic program branding. I've done horse racing and cycling and on and on and on. I've done projects for virtually every sport on the sports landscape, but the majority of my work has always been in minor league baseball. And one of the big reasons is because it's fun and I love it. I love all sports branding, but minor league baseball just has this element of fun that really you don't find. There are other minor league sports, but the minor league baseball branding is the most fun of it.
I totally agree. And I think you make it fun. And one of the big things that I noticed about your designs, I like that I can't necessarily tell it's a you design. Like you do a really good job, I think, of creating a brand and a look that is very specific to whatever the community you're working for. It doesn't look templated or sort of reused, like, you can see in other situations. So my question is, how do you start? How do you go when Savannah brings you in and says, we want to get crazy with it, but not too crazy? How do you start from that process of understanding the community and the team that you're serving?
Well, to a large degree, that comes from the team. I've been doing this for a while now, and I've learned to ask the right questions and do even more listening. And the first thing I want to know from the team is, what are they trying to achieve? And and now that's a very broad question, but I ask a lot of more focused questions to get the answer to that question, to that larger question. And what I mean is, you actually just mentioned with the Kannapolis Cannonballers, they want to get crazy, but not too crazy. So some of the questions I asked them led to that, because there are some teams that just want to go, they want something as out there as possible. An example of a team Studio Simon did that falls into that category is the Burlington Sock Puppets. That was a team in the Burlington Royals, or what they had been in the Appalachian League. And, they had always had their parent club's name because all the Appalachian League teams were owned by their parent clubs. So as opposed to most minor league teams, which are owned by individual owners and operators. And they'd kind of been saddled with straightforward traditional names. The Burlington Royals, prior to that, they were the Burlington Indians. And I believe there was even another affiliation somewhere along the road. And now all of a sudden the shackles were off and they wanted to have fun. It's something they really couldn't have, what weren't able to do before. They might have had fun with their, between innings promotions and other things like
Right.
that, but not with their branding. And so they wanted to go nuts. And so we got the Burlington sock puppets were born. Now that wasn't just a goofy name to have for the purpose of goofiness. Burlington, like many cities in the South, had a textile mill, and the main product that was made at their particular textile mill were socks, hosiery, and they were known as the hosiery capital of the South. And so that's where the socks come from, the theme of socks, but we made it a little more fun by naming them the sock puppets. With the Cannonballers, the owner of that team, Andy Sandler, was a former baseball player himself. I don't think he played professionally, but he definitely played at least through college. And as a man of a certain age, he's, if not a complete traditionalist, he at least leans a little more in that direction. So they wanted a fun identity, but they didn't want anything too crazy. So with all the questions that I ask teams, I get an idea of what their vision is for their team, what they're looking to achieve. And I then give them a brand identity that gives them the tools to achieve what their stated goals are. And I might even get so specific as to ask them, do you want, if it's a character driven identity, do you want the character to be cute? Do you want the character to be tough? Do you want the character to be a wise guy? And I'll ask enough questions that even if they don't give me a specific answer, like, yeah, I want him to have gritted teeth, I'm not expecting them to tell me literally, here's how we want every facial feature to look, and here's the exact pose we want the character to be in. But I'm good enough at reading between the lines, and if they might not actually be saying it, but they say enough things that I now have a picture of what they are looking for. And 9 times out of 10, maybe even more like 19 times out of 20, when I do the first round presentation to them, nothing's a surprise to them because I've already asked those questions and heard those answers. And so what they see, even though they were not able to imagine it in their mind's eye, what they see feels like to them that that's exactly what they were looking for.
How do you handle if you have a client that's maybe not getting it? Like you've got it laid out and everything seems like it's working and they just aren't maybe understanding what you're going for, or has it happened?
Well, first of all, yes, it has happened. Those instances, fortunately, have been few and far between. But you just said maybe they're not getting what I'm going for. Well, that's never the problem.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is me not getting what they're going for, because it's, there are other designers out there who are doing sports branding who might have an approach that's more about, okay, here's what we do, and we're going to deliver what we do for you. And not that you better like it, but more so that maybe those people are coming to them because they've seen what they have done, and they might have a particular style and they like that style, and they want what that designer or design firm is going to give them. In my case, even though there might be a common thread between the artwork that I do from one identity to the other, I'd like to think that common thread is the quality of the artwork rather than the exact look and feel, like all my stuff looks the same, because it doesn't, and it intentionally doesn't.
Right.
So,
And I think that's the strength of it for sure.
right. I won't name the client, but I had an instance. This is five, yeah, about 5 years ago, where I was having the discussions like I have with every team, with the team president and the team GM. And I immediately got the sense that the team GM didn't want to have that conversation. I couldn't understand it at first, because it's like, I'm trying to find out all about you, all about your team, all about your community, all about your fans. And every other client I talk to, they love talking about that, because it's what they do. It's what they're passionate about. You're
Mm-hmm.
not working in minor league baseball unless you're passionate about minor league baseball. You're not getting rich doing it. Uh, Team owners might be, because there's value in the franchises, but the salaries for minor league baseball front office staff nobody's getting rich. Hopefully, some of them are making decent livings, but they're certainly not laughing all the way to the bank. And so I'm talking with this guy, and I just he actually just wanted to get off the call, and I couldn't understand it. And what it turned out was, nobody there in the front office, what I shouldn't say nobody was on the same page, but there were different factions that were not on the same page, and nobody knew what they wanted. And we went through a number of rounds,
Mm.
and they never saw what they wanted to see. Now, by the way, there is a clause in my work agreements with teams that says you get, and I don't want to pull back the curtain too far, so I won't give the actual number,
Sure.
but
Absolutely.
a certain number of rounds of revisions. It's certainly not endless, because if it's endless, they're going to keep asking for change after
Sure.
change
Yeah.
after change, because it's not costing them anything. And we got to the point where we had already exceeded that. But I try not to invoke that clause, because you never want to be the I hope this isn't a major curse word. I don't want to be a hard ass.
No,
Okay. Am I
you
allowed to?
are allowed to do what you need to do.
Okay. I just didn't know if you need to bleep these things out or whatever. And it's not that it was that bad of a word, but anyway, you don't want to be that guy, and you want to. One reason for that is because you then get a reputation
Yeah.
of being hard to work with, and that's not good for business. So I try not to invoke that clause, but we got to the point where we had exceeded it by a couple of rounds. And I finally said to them, I said, I'll keep going, but another clause in those work agreements say you now need to pay, we have to negotiate an additional fee if you want to keep seeing more and more stuff. And in that case, fortunately, what they did is they pulled the plug on the project.
Okay.
I didn't fire the client. They actually said to me, "Look, we don't know what we want." And I had showed them so much stuff and so much good stuff, and they just said, "I don't think we're ready to actually move forward with anything." And now sometimes you might hear that, and then you see another designer finishes the job for them. That wasn't the case with this. They still have the identity that they were looking to change 5 years ago.
Oh,
So
wow.
that does happen. But again, fortunately, it's a rare occurrence. Again, because most people in the minor league industry are happy to answer all the questions, and I know which ones to ask, and I know how to be a good listener. And it just doesn't happen because I've listened, frankly.
Okay. I have two more questions. One, when you're designing an identity, like, do you have to keep in mind everything, like what it's going to look like on every kind of hat, shirt? You're going to design the mascot. Does all of that have to play into your role or into your process, or do you come up with sort of the main piece of the design and spin it off from there?
Well, it starts with in a first round presentation. Now, other designers might do it differently, but at least the way I do it is I will present usually a logo. And by the way, I'll usually present, when I say a logo, I'll present several different directions from which they can choose, but just one logo for each. So if I've got several different directions, several different looks, it's not like I'm doing a primary logo, several cap logos, secondary logos, all the uniforms for each of those different directions, because that's a tremendous amount of work. So I'll do one or two logos for a particular look from which they choose. Once they have chosen a direction, then I flesh out what is frankly a very wide-ranging brand identity. You know, I have the style guides I deliver to the clients are anywhere from 15 to 20 plus pages.
Oh,
so there's a lot that goes into a brand identity. But your point, or to the point of your question, where you talk about a mascot and you talk about multiple logos, those different directions that I'm presenting, even though they're not yet fully fleshed out, they are directions that I know are flesh outable, if that's not actually a phrase. I'm not going to design myself into a corner where I'll present something and then they choose a particular direction. And then I think, oh, wow, I have no idea what else I'm going to do with this. I know what I'm going to do with each of those directions. It's got to have legs, in other words. And so I'm presenting them something that I know I'm going to be able to flesh out.
Last question. Like I told you before, I'm in the film business as well. The cutting room floor is the famous place where things go that maybe don't get seen. Are there how many designs do you have out there that you loved that maybe just didn't get picked up by the team?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because what could have been. I have had some things that it's a real shame did not ever see the light of day. Now, I'd like to believe that when I present something to a client, when I present them multiple directions for their consideration, each one is as good as the next. But the reality is sometimes you just do something that's just better, because think about how many great Tom Hanks movies there have been, but some of them haven't been so great. So even the best in the business has things that are better than others. And the particular team I was mentioning, where they decided to kill the project, there's something really good on the cutting room floor. There are actually several things that are really good that ended up never seeing the light of day in that. There's other things that I guess the short answer to your question is there are tons of that. And some of them I keep in my hip pocket, because you never know. Something might come up where I can reuse that. It's actually happened a couple of times. So they do get to live. But here's an example. You talk about Paul Caputo. Paul was doing an episode of the Baseball by Design podcast, on which I was a guest, with the Erie Seawolves.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought up something that I did share from the cutting room floor. I don't normally share those, because you never know. Like I said, I might be able to use them again. But when he was doing his story on sportslogos.net about their identity, the story behind the nickname series, I shared with him a direction that was not chosen, that was presented when I was doing the SeaWorld's brand update, which featured a wolf skull with two crossed backs beneath them. And the decision at the time was the team president, who was my client, Greg Coleman, said, I really love this, but it's not. We want something that appeals to all fans. This will appeal to some fans, but it has a more limited audience than something a little more family friendly. And I agreed completely with that. I felt that way even when I developed it, but I just wanted him to see what the possibilities were at that time. Fast forward several years, and Greg came to me. I've continued to do work for them. Matter of fact, I'm currently working on a new project for them that will be on field for the 2024 season. And he wanted to do an alternate identity, and he had this idea about he was thinking of a wolf skeleton, but like the full body of a wolf. Uh-huh. And I said, you know what? We've already got something that's sort of in that vein. And I reminded him of the wolf skull direction that I did. And I said, I've got an idea for what we can do with this. And I mocked that up. I made some changes to it. I mocked that up and I showed it to him and he said, bingo. And that's already been unveiled for the 2023 season. And we call it the Howling Dead, where it still has the wolf skull in it. There's a cool new cap that it's featured on, and a new alternate jersey. So that what made it from the cutting room floor to ultimately the field. So that one literally and figuratively rose from the dead.
I love that. That's a great place to stop. But before I do that, though, for every Saving Private Ryan, there's a man with one red shoe, and that's Tom Hanks' career right there. He is Dan Simon. He is one of the guys that's keeping minor league baseball alive. Thank you so much for being on Let's Get To.
James, thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun.